Hello, everyone. Welcome back to not Britain's Hangout Hour, State of Science Fiction, though, episode 4. We're here with Robin from BookSpin. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And thank you, Britain, for having me. I just discovered your channel quite recently, actually, a few weeks ago. And I've been watching some of your State of Science Fiction episodes. They've been pretty fascinating.
I hope they're good.
Yeah, yeah, I enjoy it. I like your reviews as well. I think
Thank
it's
you.
it's your Dune review which got me into your channel.
Oh, thank you.
And I like that you're not just saying the same thing that everyone else is saying. Like Dune is amazing and everyone should love it. And
Yeah,
I,
everyone.
I like someone who's got their own opinions.
Yeah, Dune is, it's an interesting book. It's one I go back and forth on a lot. Um, I definitely don't think it's the best science fiction book ever. It's definitely very influential,
No,
though.
I know what you mean. I mean, um I enjoyed it.
Mm.
I would say for me it's a 4-star book, but it's not. It wouldn't make it to my top 10. It probably wouldn't even make it to my top 40.
Yeah, I was about to say I gave it.
Um,
I mean, I don't really do star reviews anymore, but I still kind of think in that range. I would probably give it like a 3 star, maybe. I
yeah,
think it's.
fair enough.
I mean, I think it's.
Yeah,
I think its influence is really. It's really quite something. So
yeah.
it's quite fascinating. There's a book I've been meaning to read called The Strange by a guy named Nathan Ballingrud. Apparently, there's
Okay.
some Dune inspired stuff in there.
I don't know that one. Is that sci-fi?
Yes, sci-fi western.
Okay. Is that kind of a contemporary novel or?
Yeah, it just came out last year, I think. My friend
Okay.
Jason just recently read it, so thought it was all right. I don't know. I don't know what YouTubers you watch. I know Thomas from SFF 180 really enjoyed it, which that was what intrigued me.
No. I saw you had Whitney on the other day
I
from
did. Yeah.
Secret Source, so I follow her.
Oh, all right.
Um, a few other kind of sci-fi focused YouTubers.
Yeah, I should cover more science fiction on my channel, but I've been bad at keeping up with it recently. So that's why I started this show to hear from different people about their views on state of science fiction.
Yeah, great to be here.
Well, I've said this before, but I guess I started this because I feel like science fiction's in kind of a weird spot right now. Because really, the present we're in is kind of we're sort of in the future now.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
A little bit.
Although I read so much space opera that I find that a lot of the tropes, the ideas in space opera don't really apply to the world we live in.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know
I've
when
I've
we're
I've,
I don't know when
I've
we're gonna start doing that.
I've seen so many classic books which seem to imply that by the early 21st century we would already have this intergalactic empire and flying cars, and we'd live in a post scarcity society.
Yeah, well,
Hasn't
we're not
happened.
we're not we're not there yet. No, we're not in
No.
Star Trek just yet. So you have a channel called BookSpin. You cover mostly science fiction, from what I've seen.
That's right.
I was watching your top 10 mad scientists the other day.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, that was a fun video to make. I'm trying to think of ideas for videos which haven't been done like 100 times before by different YouTubers,
Mm.
and that one just sprung into my head one night when I couldn't get to sleep, and I was thinking, mad scientists. Um, and a lot of the stories, the books that I thought of were they're all pretty old actually. There's a lot of 19th century, early 20th century stuff. It's
Yeah, I mean, I can't
yeah,
say I was shocked that Victor Frankenstein was number one. I mean, he is the prototypical mad scientist.
Yeah, and I think that was probably the first science fiction book that I read as a teenager. Um, yeah, I need to reread that sometime because I haven't read it since I was about 13.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I read. God, I don't even remember the first time I read Frankenstein for the first time. I think it was when I was reading a bunch of classics when I was in high school. Um, it's a really good book though. A little long at points, but I like it. It's a good one.
Yeah, I don't think it's a particularly long novel. It's just I think the prose, the way it's written, is very much of its time.
Mm.
You know, the these long letters and kind of quite sort of formal language. It doesn't. You could say it doesn't really translate well to a modern audience very well in
Well, I
some
still
ways.
liked it.
Yeah, no,
Still like.
yeah, it's groundbreaking, and I think for me it holds up much better than a lot of sort of modern classics like Dune, although it's a totally different type of book. But I
Yeah,
think Frankenstein is the language is kind of antiquated, but as a piece of fiction, as a work of art, it's timeless.
I still need to read The Last Man, or isn't that what it's called? The Last Man from Mary Shelley.
Yeah, I've not read that one. I've only read Frankenstein and one of her short stories, The Mortal Immortal.
Oh yeah, I've only read Frankenstein from Mary Shelley. And I was actually listening to Ozymandias from her husband Percy Shelley the other day. So
Okay.
it's weird how that comes together. But back to science fiction though. Like I guess I should ask before we get to real questions. Like what drew you to science fiction? What got you to really interested in it? Like
Um,
why'd you make a YouTube channel specifically about science fiction?
well, I've always been into kind of reading fiction in general, not necessarily sci-fi. That's kind of an interest which grew on me over the last few years. So when I was a teenager, I went through a phase where I was really into fantasy, and then I kind of expanded more into general fiction, um, and then I started watching. I went through a phase like a few years later in my 20s when I watched a lot of sci-fi movies
Mm,
and horror. Those were the two films. I think they're still my favorite genres of films are
mm-hmm.
horror and sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I did read some sci-fi over the years, but it's only at about I don't know maybe 4 years ago or something that I kind of discovered. Oh wait, this is what I feel most um, comfortable with reading, and I think it's the kind of mind expanding ideas that you
Mm-hmm.
can find in science fiction. Um, it offers all of the escapism which you can enjoy in fantasy, but it presents it in a kind of more it presents more interesting ideas. I think it 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 creates visions of the future or alternative societies which you can ponder over, you can think about. So I guess I like it because it's thought provoking.
Mm.
It's for me it's the most thought provoking genre, both in film but also in literature. And I would say it's more generally it's more thought provoking in books than it is in movies, because you know novels and short stories really go to town with the thought experiments,
Mm-hmm.
the new ideas, the alternative societies, whereas most movies are they're just there in the background. It's just you know uh, a premise for a cool story.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that actually leads me quite nicely to the first question I always ask on the state of science fiction. What, in your opinion, and of course, makes a great science fiction story?
Um, so I think it should be thought provoking. That's the most
Mm-hmm.
important thing. So there've got to be some interesting ideas going on there, because I think that's what sci-fi in particular has to offer, arguably more than any other genre. to
Mm-hmm.
get you thinking, to imagine a different society, a new form of technology, and how that would impact society.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got to be thought provoking, but of course that alone doesn't make a great story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you've got you need the other kind of ingredients that you would need for a a good story. So compelling characters, an interesting story, um, world building, of course, because we're talking about speculative fiction. So, um,
Yeah, world building's always a
yeah,
plus. You know.
because if you think about like literary fiction,
Mm-hmm.
if you're writing literary fiction, you don't really have to worry about world building,
Yeah.
right? Uh, you're writing historical fiction. You 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 base your research
Well,
on
you kind of
real
world
life,
build a
right?
little bit
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's.
You are world building, but you're basically trying to research something to make it accurate,
Mm-hmm.
right? To make it true to life,
Mm-hmm.
to give it verisimilitude.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in fantasy, it's all about world building, but you don't really have to worry about creating a plausible world
Mm-hmm.
in a fantasy story because you can just do whatever the hell you like.
Yeah.
Uh, you don't have to explain the rules. You can just say it's magic, right? Um, but with sci-fi, you have to at least make it sound plausible, even if scientifically it's not possible. It has to be plausible within the laws of the universe, or in the universe of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's quite a challenge as a writer. I don't think I could do it myself,
Mm.
and I think it's to be a talented science fiction writer. I think it takes a certain type of skill, um, and I that's why I've got a lot of respect for science fiction writers in general.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
talked to I saw you even talk to Alistair Reynolds. That's crazy. How'd that happen?
So um, I'm a member of the Birmingham Science Fiction Group. That's my local science fiction group.
Oh,
I'm on their committee, and we
was it like an actual thing like you go to, or is it like a internet
yeah,
group?
it's a group. We meet in person, usually
Oh,
every month,
oh.
and we talk to. We usually have a guest author,
Mm-hmm.
um, and sometimes we do online meetings, and sometimes we have in person meetings, and we try and get authors in the field of science fiction and fantasy, and then um, so I got involved with this group. I became part of their committee, so I've been sort of involved in organizing events with authors
Mm.
with this group, and that's how I got in touch with Alistair Reynolds when he came to visit us and he gave a talk. I so I was very lucky. I got to have dinner with him, um, and I got him to sign a few books, and I stayed in touch with him. And I when his last book came out, I dropped him an email and asked if he would be interested in uh, doing an interview for the channel, and fortunately he agreed. So yeah, that's how we got that connection.
That worked. Yeah, so that worked out for you then.
Yeah, and he's a really nice bloke, um, very down to earth, very friendly, and yeah, it's really nice talking to him.
Yeah, yeah. I've wanted to check out Alistair Reynolds. I just haven't had the mood strike yet. Maybe someday.
Yeah, and I think so. His Revelation Space series, that is one of the first science fiction series which I really went to town with, like a long running series where I read
Mm-hmm.
every single book, not just the mainline series, but the prequels and the spin offs and what have you. Um, because before then, I think the only series which I'd actually read was Hyperion, um, and I didn't even finish Hyperion. I just read the first two books.
Mm. I'm
So
actually
so
hoping to read the.
he
I'm
yeah
actually hoping to read the first one.
yeah.
Soon.
So yeah, Hyperion is a masterpiece. I
That's what I've heard.
when I made my top 15 sci-fi books video. I put that at number one. Uh, Although I haven't read it for a very long time, so I do need to reread it at some point. Uh, so yeah, I think I don't think you can go wrong with it. I think there's something in there for everyone. There's I don't know how familiar you are with Hyperion and like the structure and all that.
I've heard it's similar to Canterbury Tales, which is interesting.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to reading it though. I'm hoping it'll be good.
yeah. So it's like each tale is kind of like a different subgenre of science
Mm-hmm.
fiction. So you've got one military sci-fi tale, you've got one sort of horror tale. I'm trying to remember what else they have. Those. My memory is a bit hazy, but like basically
I think there's
each
one that's a
story
noir tale I remember hearing about.
possibly, but
I could
yeah,
be
each
kind of.
story is like a different type of science fiction, to a different character, and they each add backstory to the frame narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very well written. There's quite a few references to kind of classical literature,
Mm-hmm.
especially Keats. Um, yeah, it's been so long since I've read it. I can only have a hazy recollection of all of the details. So that's one of my goals is to reread that series.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I have the first one back here. But going back to what makes a great science fiction story, I agree with you. I think it's that and often one I get kind of frustrated with science fiction about is that it never really seems to find the balance, if that makes sense. Like I think it should be thoughtful as well as engaging on a story and character level. So
Yes,
I think we see eye to eye there.
yeah, and obviously some writers manage to strike a certain chord, and some of them emphasize some elements more than others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you've probably heard that writers like Arthur C. Clarke and Liu Cixin tend to be quite big on the ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and on a majestic scale, but they're a bit lacking on character development.
Yeah,
Um,
though I enjoyed
yeah.
Childhood's End from Arthur C. Clarke a lot. So
Yes, but I guess my point is that's not necessarily going to detract from an amazing book. So I think, for example, The Dark Forest,
mm-hmm.
which is the sequel to the Three Body Problem,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
that novel is all about the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Very little character development, and some people don't really like it for that reason. But I still think it's a really amazing book, and I don't think that detracts from uh, the story at all. Whereas there are other books which suffer from the same kind of well, some people say would suffer from the same issue, and I think it does detract from them. So I think it depends on the which book we're talking about.
I mean, I personally thought that I mean, it depends really. I mean, I think there's some books like Childhood's End where I think the concepts and kind of the idea that Clark explores in that book are really deeply compelling. Um, but something like Dune, it just feels kind of it feels like it's kind of or at least for me, it felt like it fell short of its potential.
I think for me the main issue I had with Dune is the characters just weren't credible.
I know,
Um,
yeah,
you
yeah,
you know the way Frank Herbert always kind of narrates the each character's thoughts
yeah.
like in italics,
Uh huh.
and it feels kind of affected to me,
Mm-hmm.
and the dialogue doesn't feel authentic. I don't know what it is, because maybe for most people that's not an issue.
Mm.
You look out like if you look up 10 reviews of Dune, you'll find 9 or possibly 10 of them will say this is an absolutely amazing, perfect novel, the perfect science fiction novel.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get people like you, and to some extent me, who go against the grain slightly.
They were just like,
Say,
I don't get it. Maybe I just don't get it. I
yeah.
don't know.
I think the best thing I can say about Dune is the world building is second to none,
I would agree
and
with that.
it did things with the genre which hadn't really been done before, as far as I can tell. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been a major influence. And I really enjoyed the new movie.
Mm.
So there's a lot going for it. I just didn't really enjoy reading it that much, and I don't really feel the need. I don't want to. I don't feel the need to read the sequels.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know
Yeah.
what happens. Like, I know he basically like commits genocide, and you're like, oh, well, okay. But yeah, I don't know. I wasn't hooked. In the same way I was hooked by something like like the Martian Chronicles or something. I always go back to the Martian Chronicles. It's a
Yeah,
great
I love
book.
the Martian Chronicles. I read that for the first time last year,
It's a
and
fantastic book, isn't it?
yeah, I'd say it's a new favorite for
Oh
me.
man, yeah, it's great.
If I make another top 10 video, it's definitely going to be in there.
Yeah, it's definitely
Yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, I know some people who call it fantasy, and yeah, I think you could get away with calling it science fantasy, but it's on Mars, so I mean, yeah, I call it science fiction.
Yeah, it's just I think it's for me it's the way that Bradbury writes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the quality of the prose. It's very poetic. It's very evocative,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of it feels almost dreamlike.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a it feels like it feels quite allegorical, and I don't know. I think that for me that was its main strength is the beautiful writing, and I think for a fix-up novel, it
Mm-hmm.
works remarkably well. He just takes a load of stories which on the surface aren't really connected, and he manages to turn it into a really compelling piece of literature.
Almost
So
definitely.
yeah, yeah,
My little hot take is I actually like Martian Chronicles more than Fahrenheit 451, and I like Fahrenheit 451 a lot. So I mean, I don't know if you've
well,
read
I
it,
still
but
haven't read that one yet.
oh,
So that's yeah. There's quite a few classics which I just haven't got around to yet, and that's one of them.
fair enough, fair enough.
So that's why I never claim to be an authority on anything. Uh,
That's good.
I, I I just present my opinions. I'm still discovering science fiction. I still consider myself quite new to the genre, and um, I haven't even read Foundation yet.
I have
So
not either. I know of it
okay,
though.
yeah,
I would recommend I, Robot from Isaac Asimov. Not the most character driven
uh,
piece, but some great stuff in there. It's more of a short story collection though.
yeah. So I'm planning to read Foundation very soon. Um,
Good luck. Tell me how it is.
I will. iRobot. So yeah, I'm familiar with both iRobot and Foundation. I watched the Apple TV adaptation of Foundation,
Mm,
the first season, which I know it deviates a lot from the book. So, but I know what the basic idea is about. And I think I watched the Will Smith movie of iRobot at the
oh
cinema when
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So I don't know if that bears any relation to the book.
Not really. It's kind of it's. I wrote the iRobot movie's more of a loose adaptation.
Yeah, so yeah, I probably will read that at some point. I don't have a copy of it, but if I find one, I'll pick it up. Yeah.
I guess this leads nicely to my next question. What do you find so compelling about science fiction as a genre?
It's just the limitless potential, and so I've touched on escapism a little bit. Um, when I read a book, I like to enter another world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to read about the same issues, the same problems, the same politics as the world that I'm familiar with. I want to escape, but at the same time, I don't want just a bit of meaningless or mindless escapism,
Hmm.
which I could get by, I don't know, playing a video game or something. Um, I want something that is going to make me think, that
Hmm.
might challenge me, or present an alternative idea, uh, especially if it's something that I've never considered before. An idea. It could be a piece of technology, or it could be an alternative way society could go or could be run. And then that's food for thought, isn't it?
Hmm.
So um, I think those are the kind of things I look for in science fiction, and those are the things I enjoy. And I think it offers more to me than any other type of genre.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It definitely I mean I find it compelling because I don't know, I guess I've always been quite fascinated by the future and how people are going to react to the future, and that sense of speculation about
Yeah,
I find when the ideas and how the people react to them are combined, I think that's really what makes peak science fiction, at least in my eyes.
can I ask? Have you ever watched Black Mirror?
I have, yeah, it's a great show.
Yeah,
Got a
yeah. So that
little
was
too dark for me though. I had to turn it off. I mean, I haven't watched the new season yet, but yes, I have watched it.
yeah. So before I started really getting into science fiction as a literary form, I think that was kind of my gateway into um, dark and dystopian and near future sci-fi.
Mhm.
Uh, and the interesting thing about Black Mirror is it is, for the most part, it's kind of near future. It
Mhm.
speculates on technologies which may or may not be with us, or the kind of projections of current trends in technology.
Mhm.
It takes you into very dark places, and I found that fascinating. And that, yeah, that was kind of my a stepping stone for me into science fiction in books, because I think Black Mirror is quite different to a lot of other sci-fi TV shows out there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I would compare it to the original Twilight Zone, except it might be a little darker than Twilight Zone. To be honest. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I'm reminded a lot of the original. I don't know if you ever watched the original Twilight Zone, but it reminds me a lot of that.
I I have not. I've heard a lot about it, and perhaps I should. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's in one of my top three shows of all time, so I mean, I'm hardly unbiased on that subject. Another great speculative fiction show, I would say. What do you think about the term speculative fiction? You kind of you chafe
I'm
at
not a
it, or are you fine with it?
I'm not a big fan of it, to be honest, because
Oh,
I think it's too vague. If when you look up the definition on Wikipedia, it refers to lots of different things.
I
So
know.
um, my understanding is it's a kind of umbrella term for like loads of different types of genres, like fantasy, sci-fi, and dystopian and alternate history and what have you. Um, but I've
Supernatural
heard,
horror. I throw that in there.
yeah, but I think it seems to be used in the kind of publishing industry just to as another like as an alternative label for sci-fi for writers that don't really want to identify with sci-fi,
Mm-hmm.
like Margaret Atwood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm not really sure if it's a helpful term. I think it's kind of too nebulous. Um, I so I would like to, because I think you have talked before on this show about like fantasy and science fiction and how they're kind of to some extent the boundaries have been blurred.
Yeah, yeah, we
Yeah.
talked about that a lot.
So so
Which is one of the reasons
yeah,
why I started this show.
yeah,
See
because I
if
have some
if science
thoughts on
fiction
that.
has see what science fiction's identity is, and hear it
Yeah,
from other people, and not just myself.
So yeah, my thought on that is, I don't have a problem with as with sci-fi and fantasy kind of blending in as a literary form. I think science fantasy as a genre or subgenre, whatever, has quite an interesting history, and there are lots of interesting books out there. But my kind of issue, I think, is the way that especially in modern times, how uh, they just get bundled together all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
like you go to a bookshop and it isn't there's never a separate section for science fiction and fantasy. It's always just sci-fi and fantasy. So they're all bundled together. And you get things like the Hugo Awards,
Mm-hmm.
which are which are for both science fiction and fantasy. But I think they are distinct enough as genres that they merit to have that they should have their own categories. So I think like the Hugos used to be almost exclusively science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It was only like the turn of the century when Harry Potter won the Hugo Award, the
Mm-hmm.
Goblet of Fire, won the Hugo Award.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then after that happened, there's been a load of fantasy novels that have won the award.
Mm-hmm.
You've got things like Neil Gaiman and Susanna Clarke and stuff, and there's nothing wrong with those books.
Actually, about to start
But
Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell soon, so look forward to that.
yeah, yeah, it's a great novel.
It's a thick
But
boy, though. Oh my god.
yeah, it'll take you a while. But the I guess my point is, I think the Hugo Award should be they should either just have a separate award for fantasy and a separate award for sci-fi, or they create subcategories within the Hugo. So they should have an award for best fantasy novel and best science fiction novel.
always when I
That's
always
that's my opinion, because I think they are separate genres, and they deserve to be given equal respect. But by putting them together like this, it's kind of muddying the waters, and they're not the same genre.
it might confuse people.
Uh, it, it could do, and there's already loads of categories. If you create fantasy and sci-fi, you're going to double the amount of awards on you. But um, it's like, because I look back on awards like the history of the Hugos and the Nebulas to find ideas for which novels are considered to be most prominent throughout the ages. But I'm looking specifically for science fiction, and I don't think fantasy should really have a place there.
Yeah, no, and
Yeah.
plus the guy who was named after Hugo, is it Griesbach? Not entirely sure, but he was an editor of science fiction magazines. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of. I mean, I should note I don't have an issue with science fiction and fantasy blurring. This has been the case for a long time. It's just,
Yeah.
I guess my issue was, or my issue is, I don't. It's more marketing. It's more about marketing, than really anything else.
No, I I agree with that. Um, I just think we don't mix, like, we don't mix crime with romance. In You don't have like a crime and romance shelf.
Yeah.
Uh, so we don't mix horror. A horror usually has its own category in the
Mm-hmm.
bookstore or the library. Why do we always insist of putting fantasy and science fiction together? I know they have similarities, that they have some, they're kind of like cousins in a way, but they are separate genres, and I think it is a marketing thing.
Mm-hmm.
um, but I I would appreciate it as a reader who's kind of looking out for what to read next, that if they separate them, because I'm not really interested in fantasy. I used to like it, but these days it doesn't float my boat. So
Oh no, you don't even like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
uh, well, I did read it when it came out,
Oh wow.
um, and I enjoyed it, but um, yeah, I probably wouldn't read it again.
Yeah.
I still read Neil Gaiman sometimes.
Well,
So yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, I do love the fantasy genre a lot, but I find that there are. I do agree with you though that I think there are enough differences in science fiction and fantasy where they can kind of stand on their own. And I noted this in some of my other episodes, but I was starting to get worried that maybe science fiction's starting to lose its identity a little bit, which is another reason why I started this show. See if anyone shares my worries or if I'm just thinking too hard about things, which is always a possibility.
yeah. I'm not sure if it's losing its identity or not. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, that's my only real gripe. Really, is like the mixing of the two in terms of a marketing and awards level.
Mm-hmm.
On a literary level, I have no problem with them mixing. I've read some very uh, interesting and engaging science fantasy, and I'm thinking of, for example, Gene Wolfe and Roger Zelazny,
Still
some
need
of
to
my
read.
favorites.
Or well, no, I have read Gene Wolfe. I read The Land Across. I didn't really like it, but I do want to try Book of the New Sun though at some point.
Yeah, so that's his most famous work, but I only read the first book in that. I think it's four books, isn't it?
I think
Um,
so.
that is a famously dense work,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of struggled to get through it. But I do intend to give it a try sometime. I'm kind of more into some of his other stuff, some of his historical fantasy.
Mm.
So he wrote a series in the 80s called uh, Soldier of the Mist.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah, so back when I did read quite a lot of fantasy, uh, that was what got me into his work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's one of my favorites. Um, but yeah, the Book of the Sun is science fantasy for
Yeah,
sure.
that's what
Yeah,
I've heard, and I'm looking forward to reading that at some point. Will I like it? I don't know, but I hope to try it at some point. Um, I don't know when. um, that does kind of go into like what are some of your favorite tropes in science fiction? Are mad scientists a
favorite
part of them?
tropes.
Because you made a video about
Yeah,
that.
I do like a good mad scientist. I like utopia as well as dystopia. But the thing is, dystopia is such a common trope that it's almost ubiquitous in science fiction. Almost every single possible vision of the future is dystopian to some extent. So, and also, dystopian stories make a good, or dystopian worlds make a good story
Yeah.
because you've already got like some kind of conflict or some kind of system that oppresses people, which we we don't want to go to as a society. But in the story, it creates a, a dramatic narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas utopia, I think, is much more challenging to write as an author because if you create a perfect society where everyone's happy, there's no there's not much room for dramatic tension there, right? For something to go wrong or for people to struggle against something. So that's why I think it's all the more impressive when you do find writers that do that. And often, because I did actually make a video, it's one of the first videos I made on my channel about utopian novels.
Mm.
And one thing I found is that often when a writer does create a utopian world, it's not quite what it seems, or it's not as perfect as it looks, or it's a case of like a stranger from our world enters the utopian world and then learns how terrible we are back on Earth and how this is how we should be doing it, which is kind of more of a trope in older fiction. You don't really see it much these days. It's kind of a bit too didactic, I think, for modern tastes.
Have you read any of Ursula K. Le Guin's stuff? I've always wanted to try her. I just I
Yeah.
just don't know where
So
I would start though.
well, well. Speaking of utopia, that
I
she
heard she's
wrote,
done like utopian stuff, which is why
yeah.
I brought her up.
So there's the Dispossessed, which is one of her most famous novels, which is it was subtitled An Ambiguous Utopia, and it's set on two parallel worlds, and one is a kind of hyper capitalist dystopia, and then it's got like a twin world where they've kind of they're at a kind of cold war with, where it's an anarchist society with very few resources, where everything is kind of equally distributed and shared. So basically, she presents a model for. I mean, you could call it a utopian society, but she doesn't sugarcoat it.
Mm-hmm.
It she doesn't. It's not like she's telling you this is what society should be. She presents a model of a society based on utopian ideals and what that might look like compared with the hyper capitalist world, which is we're pretty much familiar with in our own world.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
not
So
not a lot of love for capitalism in science fiction.
well, that's another. You see, that's another thing which interests me about utopian visions, especially when you get like classical socialist utopias. Um, there is. Have you read any Ian M. Banks?
I know of him. I haven't read him yet. My
I
friend
have not read
Raph
him
is a
yet.
big fan of his.
Yeah, I've not read him yet, but I've heard he was quite. Um, well, I don't want to claim something which I don't know is true, but I've heard that he is quite sort of left leaning in his politics,
I've heard that
and
too.
yeah, and basically his culture series is set in a post scarcity economy,
Mm-hmm.
like almost like a socialist utopia where
Mm-hmm.
everything no one was without need. Everything is provided for,
Mm-hmm.
and this is I don't know because I haven't read it yet, but that I really want to read that series. That that idea just really intrigues me. So utopia, I think it's not done enough in science fiction. I'd like to see more um, novels or stories set in a utopian world. That doesn't mean everything is perfect, but it's based on an ideology or an idea or a goal to strive towards perfection. We know from our real world that that's always ended in disaster. But it would be interesting to see in an alternate reality where it's not quite disastrous, but it's not quite what you're expecting either. Um, and speaking of Le Guin, she wrote another utopian story,
Mm-hmm.
which a short story called "The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas,"
Mm. I don't
which
think
I
I've
can
heard of
highly
this.
recommend. Yeah, you can. It's only a few pages long. It's definitely worth reading,
Mm-hmm.
and she basically posits a perfectly harmonious utopian society where everyone's happy, but this all depends on the suffering of one child. So basically, they've got like one young child who's kept locked up in a basement or something, and in order for this society to prosper and everyone to be healthy and happy and fulfilled in life, this child is constantly tortured, and they're deprived of you know any kind of love or joy in life. And um, she basically it's a kind of thought experiment
Oh,
because
jeez.
every citizen of this society at some point in their life they have to go down and learn the truth and meet this child, and then they decide, can they live with that? If so, yeah, go back into society, you'll be happy. If not, you're banished into exile. And of course you think everyone will say, well, no one's going to accept that. But of course, but if you the your if your only choice is between staying in the society you you know, the society you love in, you live in, and you love, and exile, most people end up just staying where they are. And it only takes there's only a few a small minority of um, individuals of certain character who are brave enough to leave the system behind.
It's interesting. I'll have to read that. It sounds really.
Yeah, it's a kind of philosophical story. Um, it's more of a thought experiment than an actual story, but I think it's a good introduction to Le Guin as an author.
I'll have to try that out. I'll have to try that
Yeah,
out. I mentioned some of my favorite tropes before. One of the things I forgot to mention, I really like colonization stories. I don't know why. Um, might be because we have a long history of colonizing things, but I guess that's why I like the Martian Chronicles a lot, and something like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, because
right.
those books cover those topics.
So space colonization.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
I find that quite
Um,
fascinating.
are you kind of more into the technical, that detail, like the hard SF elements of how could this be done, or is it more just like the sense of adventure, like the exploring the unknown? Or...
I'm more about like exploring the unknown. I mean,
Fair
I'm not a
enough.
science guy. I'm not really like, ooh, how would this happen? Like I don't. It's kind
No,
of why I struggle with Asimov or even Clark at points, because they're really fascinated by the how they would do it rather than just how would
so
people
I'm
react
thinking
to
of
it.
like Kim Stanley Robinson, the what's it called, the Mars trilogy.
I haven't read those yet.
I've not read it because basically for that reason. I don't know, but I kind of get the impression it's going to be too dry for me.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's. I mean, some of Asimov's stuff's like that. So I've heard the Foundation's a little like that. So I don't know, but
yep. But I tell you what, I have just read, which you have you read? I know before you were talking about 2001, Space Odyssey.
mm-hmm.
Have you read the book?
I have not. I've wanted to though.
Because
Um,
I've just read it.
how's it
Uh,
compared to the movie?
I enjoyed it. I think it's not as technical as I thought it might be.
Mm,
Um, it's I think it captures the sense of wonder. I think the film was trying to convey, and it it's a bit easier to understand than the film. It kind of makes explicit sort of what's going on in terms of the narrative, whereas in the film, a lot of it's just kind of left. It's kind of ambiguous. It's left to the viewer's interpretation,
mm-hmm.
uh, and I think it actually complements the film very well. So I think my advice for anyone who's never watched the movie or read the book would be to watch the film first, get the kind of pure, unadulterated experience without any preconceptions, and then read the book, and then watch the movie again. Because I'm planning to watch the film again uh, soon, based on what I've read and what I remember from. Because I remember watching the film before, and I was totally confused.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not one you watch like for it's an experience for one.
yeah. You definitely have to go into it with an open mind. But I actually enjoyed 2001. I mean, reading it more than Childhood's End.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's interesting.
I mean, you could argue Childhood's End has more of a conventional narrative.
Mm,
It's got, it's got more, got interesting ideas. It's got, I know characterization is not a big thing, but it does have characters at least.
mm-hmm.
Whereas the characters in 2001, they exist obviously, but you learn nothing about them pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
There's zero backstory. There's very little dialogue. There's it, it's more kind of the sense of wonder, I think, that
Mm-hmm.
Clark conveys of space exploration and the wonders of the universe. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'll have to check
Yeah.
it out eventually. I mean, there's a lot of science fiction books I need to check out at some point, but I just haven't gotten around to them yet. Um, I guess that leads to my next question here. Well, questions. Who are some of the greats of science fiction, in your opinion, of course, and who are some newer science fiction writers that you've really like modern sci-fi writers that you found to be really interesting and
Okay,
compelling?
so we're talking about classic authors and contemporary,
Yes.
right? Um, okay, so I think with a lot of classic authors, my issue is I've like read bits of their work, but I haven't read enough of them to say definitively this is one of the greats.
Mm,
So I know you like Philip K. Dick.
I
Uh,
do. I
I
really do.
I've only I've
Man,
only read one book by him so far, and that was Do You Enjoy Stream of Electric Sheep?
that's a good one. That's a
Which
good one to start at.
yeah, which I loved. So I don't think it's fair for me to say he is a favorite when I've only read one book. Uh, but so in terms of classic authors, I'm probably going to have to say Ursula K. Le Guin is one of my favorites.
Mm,
Um, we've been talking about. I think, yeah, her. I loved The Dispossessed, which we talked about. I loved The Left Hand of Darkness and The Lathe of Heaven. Those are three of my favorite books. Um, so yeah, I definitely put her in there. Again, Ray Bradbury. I've only read the Martian Chronicles, but I think just based on that, I think he shows a lot of promise, and I do definitely need to read more of him. Um, let's just say Le Guin for the time being, right? For classic authors, right? For modern authors, um, let me see. So we've talked about Alistair Reynolds,
mm-hmm.
but he is one of my favorite modern writers, and I have to mention him because he kind of really got me into the genre,
Mm-hmm.
or at least in let's say he renewed my interest, he revived
Mm-hmm.
my interest over the last few years. Um, are there any other modern authors? Uh, Liu Cixin, he's the three body problem writer. I think he's had a huge impact, and I know he's quite a controversial writer. Like some people hate him, um, but I really enjoyed the what's it called, the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy.
Yeah, I haven't
Yeah,
read the three body problem yet. I've heard a lot of mixed things on it.
yeah. I really enjoyed it. I think the two main issues people tend to have are the weak characterization, which I kind of agree with, and stilted writing. Some people say that like the prose, the dialogue doesn't sound very convincing, and I can see their point to an extent, but I think people sometimes overstate it. I think that the strength of the ideas um, are enough to make it a compelling read, but it kind of he takes it to a much higher level in the second and third books. So the three body problem is not the strongest of those three novels. It's kind of like the prologue in a sense
Mm,
to a much bigger story.
mm.
Um, but I think he's worth mentioning for a number of reasons, but one of which is the impact he's had on Chinese science fiction and world sci-fi as in
I heard
general.
there's a show
Yeah,
that came out recently. I actually need to watch that
I've
since I'm at
watched it.
work. Is
Yeah,
it any
the
good?
Netflix do. I enjoyed it. I know it's tended to kind of divided people. Some people love it, some people hate it. I did enjoy it. I don't think it was a perfect adaptation. I think it felt a bit. I think the pacing was a bit off to me. I think they were trying to cram too much into 8 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whereas if you compare it to the Chinese version, it's the opposite. Like the pacing was too slow. So the Chinese version they took like 30 episodes.
Oh my god.
But yeah, I don't have the time for that. 30 episodes just to adapt one book, whereas in the Netflix um, adaptation, they were kind of wrapped up with book one by the end of episode 5.
Yeah, speaking of
So
that,
yeah, I read Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers. I yeah,
actually read it after I watched the film version Stalker, and it's one of those rare. Like, I feel like the adaptation is more interesting, at least in my opinion. I know there's some. I don't know if you've ever seen Stalker or even read
I
Roadside Picnic.
I haven't done either yet, I'm
Oh,
afraid, but I yeah, that is one that I need to read. It's on my bookshelf.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a solid read. I liked it. I didn't hate it. I just thought the movie was much more interesting with its. Also, I just like the idea of
Uh,
this weird zone that alien boogaloo's going on in.
yeah. So, would you recommend reading it first or watching the movie first?
Well, I mean, I think it really. I mean, I don't really. I mean, I usually read the books first, but the
Yeah,
movie and the
that
book are so different. You could do either or, and you'll be fine.
yeah, because
But I would recommend
that's
when
how I feel.
watching Stalker. I mean, it's kind of like 2001. It's you have to turn everything off. Don't look at your phone. Just pay attention to the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think for most adaptations, it's better to read the book first, so you can form your own ideas of your own impressions of what's going on before you see what the director wants you to see. But I think in with 2001, it's a little bit different.
Mm.
But because it's
It's kind of like a
you know
Clockwork Orange, maybe.
yeah,
Like I would recommend to people watch the movie of that book first, and then read the book to get the idea on how they talk. But
but it's interesting you mentioned weird zones because I remember you talking about Light before, M. John Harrison.
I read it
Uh,
last year. I
with
thought it was a very fascinating book.
I haven't read it yet, but I went I met John Harrison last
Really?
year. It's not with my sci-fi group. It was with another event, but he he gave a talk. He gave a reading from his new book, and I got him to sign um, my copy of Light. So I definitely want to read that one. Um, will you be, or have you already continued with that series? Because I think it's actually a trilogy, isn't it?
I have not yet, but I have not yet. I do hope to read God, what's the second book called? Nova Swing. That's right. Hope to
Yeah,
start that at some point. I don't know when I'm gonna do it, but
yeah. He's quite interesting because he's one of the few M. John Harrison, like one of the few sort of classic, if we can call him that. I mean, he's one of the few sort of writers who's still around. He was active like back in the day, back in the 70s, I think it was.
yeah, I mean, he's one of
Uh,
the new wave guys. So
yeah,
there's a lot of like postmodernism, and there's a lot of discussion about quantum mechanics in that book. One of my friends. His name's Jason. He was actually on the first episode of the show.
yeah,
Um, he's reading Light right now, and he's just like, "What the hell is going on here?" And I'm like, "I'll just keep reading. You'll see."
yeah. I do like kind of weird. I don't know if that's the right term to use. Like weird science fiction
Yeah, I do
things which
too.
just blow your mind.
You're just like, "What?" I know. It's
Yeah.
like, "What?" Have you read the Southern Reach books?
No, not yet. I've got Annihilation. Again, that's on my bookshelf. Someone gave it to me for Christmas. Haven't read it yet.
It's a great book. I really enjoy it a lot. I mean, I think all three of them are really good. Though Acceptance is a bit well, all three of them are pretty out there. But Annihilation and Authority you can follow pretty good. Acceptance is a bit more. Well, you can follow it, but it's more experimental. I would say.
Yeah, and I think they've just announced the fourth one is coming out, isn't it?
I know Absolution.
Yeah,
I'm looking
yeah,
forward to it. I personally
yeah.
like Born even more, which is another kind of
I
spicy take. Apparently, a lot of Jeff Vandermeer fans are kind of.
I've
Like,
not read any Vandermeer yet, so
oh
I
man,
can't really
I
offer an
envy you.
opinion. It's on the ever growing list
I
of
know. Yeah.
stuff.
Oh my
So
god.
there's only so many books I can read at once, uh, and I'm not a really fast reader. So
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's uh yeah. I hope you like Vandermeer whenever you get to him.
yeah, but definitely Light um, is quite high up my TBR,
Hmm.
and since I saw your review, I think I kind of prioritized it a little bit more.
Yeah, it's yep, this book right here. Mhm. Is this your copy, by the
Nice.
way? Is this the copy you have, or
No, let me see if I can find mine. Mine is the SF Masterworks.
oh
Here it
wow,
is. This is my
oh
edition,
wow,
and I'll
okay.
show you the signature
Oh, very cool.
if you can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The only thing that was kind of an issue I had is I like some of the stuff was so out there I couldn't quite visualize it because I'm a visual reader. I don't know about you, but that's just how I like visualizing what's going on. It was kind of weird. I couldn't quite visualize it at points, but it's a
would
fascinating book though. It's very
would you say it's one of those novels which is impossible to adapt to the screen?
oh god, I can't see how they would do it unless it's like a mini series or if they
I mean,
slapped a bunch of money behind it.
to be honest, that's kind of what I thought about the three body problem.
Or
Um,
if they get someone like I don't know, who's like a really like if they got like David Lynch to do it
David
maybe.
Lynch, that was exactly what I was going to say. If anyone can do it, he can. Uh,
Or
yeah,
like Denis Villeneuve maybe. I don't know.
yeah, um,
Yeah, it's out
yeah.
there though. I do want to read Nova Swing though because it sounds right up my alley. But we'll see. I like Light though. It's one I want to reread it though. It's one of those books like it's one of those like that kind of desires a reread. At least to me it did.
Great, and it's not a terribly long book, so
No, it's not. It's about
yeah,
like
I'm
300
definitely
some.
I'm going to try and fit it in at some point this year. I've got quite a packed of reading schedule, but I'm going to try and fit that in.
Um. Oh yeah, I should also mention I do like Andy Weir. I though I've kind of I've heard that Project Hail Mary has that similar kind of smart ass dialogue from The Martian, which is kind of I like seeing authors challenge themselves, I guess. So, but I
Yeah,
think Andy Weir is pretty good. I like The Martian at least.
I'm afraid to say it, but that's another author I haven't read yet.
Oh,
um,
what have
I've,
you
I've,
read?
I, no, I watched The Martian, the movie,
Oh yeah, that's pretty good.
and
Yeah.
I kind of felt that I've heard it's quite a faithful adaptation, and I kind of thought, well, it, do I really need to read the book? I'm definitely going to read Project Hail Mary. I've got the book, and I'm ready for that. And if I really love it, I might move on to some of the other stuff.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
need to read Project Hail Mary, but I've heard it's kind of a lot like The Martian, so I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I try not to knock books off unless it's like racist or something like that, or if it's like I don't know.
Oh, well, there's an interesting question, right? So, how do you feel about reading authors that have like controversial views, or authors who, well, it could be a modern author, it could be from back in the day, who basically we would say that they're racist or homophobic or misogynists or something. Because
I'm personally of the opinion I think it can be a very educational experience of well what not to do, but I think it's also an interesting study for kind of how we've changed over the years, which
yeah,
which I'm kind of interested in because there's I often hear people say they can't make movies like that anymore because there's a bunch of content um,
and
that
I I mean, I kind of think we always have to look at something in context of the time it was written. So I think I would make a distinction between, let's say, a contemporary author controversial author like Orson Scott Card, right?
Mm.
And
I never
someone
really.
writing 100 years ago. So like H.G. Wells, for example.
You know, I
Oh,
think I
by
think
the way,
H I think H.G. Wells is actually aged better than people give credit for. I mean,
oh yeah,
um,
I should have actually mentioned him as one of my favorite classic writers
oh yeah,
because
he's
I
great.
think
Though,
the thing is
personally not
he was.
into War of the Worlds. Though, kind of feels like a dry journalist report.
I know what you mean, but it was is
But the
he
Time
he
Machine and
was
the Invisible Man, great stuff. Or at
yeah.
least I like them.
But- No, I liked him. I think there's anything I've read by him which I didn't
And I have a
enjoy.
soft spot for
But
Jules Verne. I like Journey to the Center of the Earth, even though it's completely absurd. It's more
yeah,
science fantasy, really. If you.
um, but yeah, the interesting thing about H.G. Wells is so by this, he was actually for the standards of his day, he's quite progressive,
Oh yeah.
right? But he was basically an anti-imperialist. He was also a socialist, and he this comes across in a lot of his science fiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of his science fiction, to some extent, is an allegory or an allusion to contemporary social problems, like injustice and inequality and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, some of it is dated because of the time it's written. So there's one short story he wrote, which I read last year, and I forget what it's called now, but it basically, if you read it today, it sounds really racist.
Mm.
Um, and I can't remember exactly what happened now, but there was basically there's a black protagonist, and he um, the story is beside the point, but it basically is written using some quite racist terminology,
Mm.
or at least what we would consider racist today. But when Wells was writing it, he was trying to create a sympathetic character. I think I remember now. It's the black character was actually I think he was a slave,
Mm.
or he had been enslaved by a white master, and he was trying to sort of free himself. Um, but he was presented like as a inferior being, like he's less intelligent than the white man.
Mm-hmm.
So it's clearly racist, at least the way it was narrated. But I don't think Wells actually intended it to be racist because he was trying to create a sympathetic black character,
Mm-hmm.
which was unusual for the standards of the time because this was like 1890 something.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you
Uh,
mean. I mean, I've read like I've read the original Robert E. Howard Conan stories, and I mean, there's some stuff in there that would definitely raise some eyebrows. There's one story where Conan, without a lick of irony, says it's his duty as a white man to save this lady from these, you know, black tribesmen people. So, but I think what people should keep in mind, I think, um, this is sort of a problem I have with discourse around people like Robert Heinlein. I feel like people take what he writes and talks about too literally, if that makes sense. They think like, oh, he's
yeah,
writing about those things. That must mean he believes those things. And it's like, no, not at all. I don't know if that's the case. Now, Moon is a
yeah.
harsh mistress, maybe. I mean, uh, Heinlein was an interesting man,
Well,
kind of a weird
that's the
guy.
thing.
Then
You
again, a
could
lot of
say
them
that
were.
about. There are many things you could say that for, though, right? Because a lot of things you could, a lot of things could be interpreted as satire. So, um, what was it called? The that the military sci-fi that Heinlein wrote.
Oh, Starship Troopers. Yeah,
Yeah, Starship
that's a good
Troopers.
book actually.
Like some people will look at that and say it's fascist, or it's militaristic,
I
and it's
mean, the book
basically.
kind of is. I mean, it's definitely about
I
like,
mean, yeah,
oh,
I
military honor, and it's honorable to serve for. It's not
I think
fascist though. Like the
yeah,
government, it's more nuanced. Like the government is more like a constitutional republic of some
yeah.
sort.
I mean,
It's just they're very militaristic, and
I think you're probably right. I would agree with that, but
it
it can
makes
also be
sense that
yeah.
though, because like Heinlein was in the military and he was very proud of that, and he thinks that serving in the military is a pretty great thing, which take with that as you will.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a because I mentioned that maybe that's more of a clear cut example, but there are some less black and white examples of where you've got character, like for example, a misogynistic character in a novel,
Mm.
and let's say he is the POV character, and so we're supposed to identify with him, and then some people interpret that as, oh, this reflects the author's views,
Yeah.
or this, or this, or even if it doesn't, it's kind of because we are, as a first person narrator, you kind of intimately get inside someone's head.
Mm-hmm.
It can cause a problem when you find that person is a bit of an asshole. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that this is a reflection on the writer. And this is another problem which Liu Cixin has been accused of, is that like sometimes his characters are misogynistic or imperialistic or what have you, but they don't. I've read those books twice, and I don't think I've found anything in there which explicitly leads me to believe that they reflect who the writer is. So
I mean, yeah. I mean, I was, going back to my point about Conan. I do. I think that Howard is good enough of a writer where it's showing that this is what his characters believe rather than this is just what he thinks.
right.
Now, some of them might reflect his opinions. I don't know. I didn't know the guy. Um, but
Well, he was quite outspoken, wasn't he? I
yeah,
think he was a libertarian. Um,
he's kind of a
I think,
primitivist, honestly.
yeah,
He didn't really
yeah,
like society
yeah.
or civilization or any of that. He was a weird man.
And I think he does sometimes use characters as basically to spout his as kind of mouthpieces
Oh, for
to
sure.
spout
I
his
mean,
view.
in
Yeah,
the
so
in the Queen of the Black Coast story, when Conan gives his speech about, I slay, I live my life, and I'm content. I think that's kind of a filibuster moment. But at the same
yeah,
time, like it's so like great, you're just like, mm! That just shows how good of a writer he was. Anyway, um, yeah, I've noticed that like even nowadays, like Bret Easton Ellis with American Psycho. I mean, there's people who are like, "Oh, is he like that?" And it's like, no. Now that
yeah,
he
and
hasn't really helped himself because he can be kind of a jackass at times, but um,
and also I think like Orson Scott Card. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff,
I've only
but
read Ender's Game
like,
from him, and I thought,
okay. I mean, I think I've read Ender's Game and I've read Speak for the
Though
Dead
Whitney tells me
and
the sequel, I forget the name,
Speaker for the Dead.
Speaker of the Dead. Thank you.
Yeah,
Apparently, that one's way better. So
I would agree with that actually, and I think Speak of the Dead is an amazing novel.
I'll have to
I
try it
actually
out.
read it. I read it. I actually read it before Ender's Game, which is a bit weird, but I read it as part of a book
Like I
club.
think Ender's Game is a solid book, but it's kind of like I don't know. It just feels kind of it feels kind of soapy at points. You know what I mean? With the
Well,
like teen
with Ender's
drama.
Game, yeah, I think it's for me it's a bit too YA-ish
Yeah, exactly.
to float my boat. It's I think Ender's Game is a good story, nice twist. It's got a few good things going for it. For me, the one of the main issues I had with it was that most of the cast are like 6 years old, or well, they basically grow up throughout the story,
Hmm.
but they're children, they're young children, but they don't speak like kids.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's not it's this whole thing with affected dialogue again, which in my opinion Dune suffered from. The characters aren't believable, but in Speaker for the Dead, we follow Ender when he's grown up, and it's a lot more philosophical in tone. Because the first book is basically a military sci-fi adventure
Hmm.
with a youth cast, whereas the second book is totally different. It's a first contact story on another planet, and it's got like a big family drama going on in the background,
Mm-hmm.
but it explores some quite deep themes. But the interesting thing about it, I think, is if you look at this book and you look at like the message or messages that it's kind of seems to be teaching or encouraging, um, they're kind of quite sort of, you know, ideas that most people could get on board with, like the need for mutual understanding, the kind of things you might expect when you get two vastly different species who come into contact with each other, and how do we resolve these dramas, these conflicts, and so on. But it's kind of at odds with what we know that the writer himself is as a person, at least with regard to the whole homophobia thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's when it comes to stuff like that, I don't know. I mean, it's yeah,
Yeah,
I just think Orson Scott Card's okay, but then again, I haven't read Speak of the Dead, so I've
yeah,
heard
and
from
I've
several people that's way better than Ender's Game. And I don't hate
uh,
Ender's Game. I just think it's kind of meh. It's like it's fine. Like the twist is great. Like the ending is pretty damn good, but like the rest of it is kind of it's fine.
yeah, you should read Speak of the Dead. I've not read beyond that. I've heard the series goes a bit downhill from there, so I think you can read the second book and be done with it, and it's well worth a read. Um, yeah. But then at the same time, I always hear about how controversial Orson Scott Card is or is supposed to be, but I've never really looked into detail about what it is he's said or what he's claimed or whatever. I just hear, oh, he's homophobic or he's anti-gay marriage or something. So
I think he was just
maybe I'm
anti-gay
not really being
marriage,
fair
but
on
I'm not
him.
entirely sure. I'm not, in all
Yeah,
honesty. I mean, I try not to comment on things I don't know too much about, but yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's a lot of room for him to go on homophobic diatribes, and I don't remember homophobic diatribes in uh, Ender's Game. So
no, it's not there. At least I don't think it's there.
I haven't
I think it
seen.
would be a lot more controversial if it was as a book.
Oh yeah, it would be. It would
Yeah,
be infamous. I'm actually one of the people who
yeah.
likes Stranger in a Strange Land, and that's a weird ass book. I need to read it again
So
though.
that one, I've not read it yet, but I'm planning to read it this month.
I think it's
So
kind of hilarious on Twitter. He has a little thing now called Grok, which is from that book. I wonder if it's a
yeah,
reference to the book. I really am.
really, yeah. Stranger in Strangeland. That's something that I've been meaning to read for ages. I've kind of been put off because it's quite a chunky book and it's kind of controversial because some people love it, some people hate it, and but I think it has such an iconic place within 60s literature that I feel like I need to give it a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I would
Yeah.
also. I really like Slaughterhouse-Five, but I need to read that again as well because um I haven't read it. In a I for some reason I don't remember it too much of it.
Yep. I I enjoyed that one. Um it's not my favorite Vonnegut, but it is really good. Yeah. I think my favorite Vonnegut was Galapagos. Do you know that one?
I've only read Slaughterhouse-Five, but I think I've heard of Galapagos.
Yeah, it's very weird, it's very surreal, and it's pretty funny. Yeah, and I something I'm going to plan to reread soon. So
So I guess, well, I
yeah.
guess we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but if you want to expand on it, do you have any worries about where the science fiction genre is headed, and are there gripes that you have with the genre that you would like to see improved? Though again, I know we were kind of talking about that a little
Um.
bit,
Okay. Well,
with the
I'll try not to
marketing.
talk about fantasy again. Um. I don't know. I think for me, one of the things I think can be off-putting to about sci-fi as a genre for both me and potential outsiders is there's so many serials, there's so many book series, and so that it's off-putting sometimes. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I don't want to commit to a trilogy where each book is 600 pages long unless I'm pretty damn sure that I'm going to enjoy it.
I know what you mean.
Uh,
Yeah,
or something like The Expanse, which is 9 books long, I think. Um,
it's always tough
and
asking for like recommendations for beginners. 'Cause I'm like, oh
yeah,
man,
the,
I could go
that's one
nuts.
thing. That's one thing I quite like about a lot of older sci-fi is they've got a lot of short standalone novels, which are like 200
I
or
mean, that's the cool
250
thing about
pages.
Philip K. Dick. It's like 200 something pages and you're good.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. A compact standalone story, which can be enjoyed on its own merits. That you because I I read a lot of sort of first books in the series to try something out, to try a new author, to see what how something like. But and then I read it and think, yeah, I quite enjoyed that. But am I going to commit myself to reading two, three, four more books in this series when there are so many other things I want to try? And quite often the answer is, well, no, not yet. But then part of me is thinking, well, maybe I'm missing out. I'm missing out on the full experience,
Mm.
or I don't, or maybe or I could be missing out. And I think
The
as a writer, sometimes it's easier just to continue writing in a world which you've already created,
Yeah, but a lot of
especially
people have
when
been saying FOMO,
yeah,
and it is real for sure.
yeah it's like because fantasy and science fiction writers they invest so much into world building, they spend so much time creating this world
You forget to put the
that I can
story in
understand
there.
that yeah they want to develop it. They don't just create one story and then be done with it. um, and of course I guess as a marketing point of view for publishers, they like series. um, this for the same reason that people like the movie industry likes franchises, because it's predictable, because they can predict success based on what has come before.
Mm-hmm.
uh, that's actually one of my main gripes with the movie industry is I think there's very little innovation these days,
I
and
would agree with that.
it's so reliant on franchises.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Everything is a sequel or a remake or a reimagining or a prequel. I don't think the literature has quite been gone that direction in quite the same way, but I do think we sci-fi and fantasy have become very series focused. I know they've always had long series, but I think personally I would rather read like 10 standalone novels than three different trilogies. Uh, I I feel like I'm getting a wider scope of experience of literature to enjoy with those novels, even if I don't enjoy all of them, than I would just sticking with a series. But that's not to say I don't like series.
Mm-hmm.
There's some series which I've really enjoyed, like Revelation Space.
Mm-hmm.
It's just but because I'm quite a slow reader, it's asking a lot of me to invest my time in these epic series, especially when each novel is really thick and
Mm-hmm.
door stoppers. I mean, so yeah, I don't know. I guess you could call it a gripe, uh, but there's still plenty of great standalones out there.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
still
yeah.
just yeah, I'm still discovering a lot of the old stuff. So
That's true. Oh my god. I mean, that's one of my later questions. We'll get to that. But I guess my gripe is more more like about marketing, just how it's marketed. I feel that even though I would say that The Expanse is most definitely a science fiction story, it's kind of marketed in the same way as like a fantasy series or something. Or I mean, you could
yeah,
say the same thing about. Have you read the Sun Eater books yet? Because
no, I haven't. I know they are very popular.
yeah, I tend to.
Yeah,
If you didn't notice by watching my channel, I tend to be
yeah,
kind of. I mean, I like certain popular things, but I tend to be very suspicious of popular things.
Yeah.
I doubt by nature. It's hard for me to.
Um, that well, that no, I can relate to that.
But
I quite like.
I think Christopher Rocchio would be an interesting guy to talk to, though. I've seen interviews with him.
Yes.
But sorry, continue
Yeah.
what you were saying.
What was I saying? Well, just going back to that point about long running series, I think the one long series which I haven't quite committed to, but I think I might do it, is the Culture series by Ian and Banks, which I
I need to get
mentioned
to
earlier.
that. Dang.
But I think what I'll do is, rather than say definitively I'm going to read the whole thing, I'll read the first two books, and then
Apparently, they're all
if
standalones. So I mean, if you know.
there's yeah, I think it's not. I think you're right. They can be read in any order, but they're all set within the same universe.
Mm-hmm.
The first book, Consider Phlebas, is quite divisive. Some people say it's not very good, but I would still want to read. I still want to read it. It's the first one that's published, but I can't really decide my opinion on the series based on one book, which is divides people. So I'll go on to the second book, Player of Games, I think it is, which is generally considered pretty good. So I'll read those two, and if I'm happy with either one of them or both of them, I'll commit to the whole series. So that's my goal for next year. I'm not doing it this year because I've got too many projects I'm committed to. I don't have time for that. But 2025, that's my plan. That's long-term planning.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So many books, so little time. But yeah, no. Going back to Rocky, I think Rocky. I would like to have Rocky on the show to see what he would have to say because he seems like an interesting dude. I haven't read Sun
Well,
Eater yet though, so
yeah, I think I'm not sure how many books there are in that series at the minute, but I would at least read the first one before you
yeah, I would at least read the
invite
first
him on.
one.
Yeah. Yeah, there are other writers out there who I'll be very honored to speak to on my channel, but I keep telling myself no, I can't contact them yet. At least I need to read more of their work, at
Yeah, I
least
know
one of
what you
their
mean.
books. Yeah.
I've only read two of M. John Harrison's books. I've read the Centauri Device, which is, it's fine. It's very much a proto cyberpunk story, and
That's one of his older ones, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I read Light, which I thought was a far more fascinating experience. Um, as you know, you said you watched the review, so
Yes.
hope I did
Yeah.
justice to the book. Because in all honesty, I'm like, oh god, I don't know
Well,
if I got it right.
you've convinced me to. I mean, it was already in my TBR, but you've convinced me to raise it up a little bit. So hopefully, I can get around to that sometime this year.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh man, again, there's so many. Like, I hope to read The Strange. I don't know if I'm gonna read it this year, but I would like to read it soon. It seems like one I would enjoy a lot. I've heard
Yeah.
it be compared to The Martian Chronicles. I'm like, ooh, gotta check that out.
Yeah.
But you know, yeah, so many. But that actually leads me quite nicely to my next question here. Are there science fiction novels that you would like to read in the future?
Okay.
Aside from the
Yeah.
ones you've already mentioned.
Yeah, because we've alluded to some already. So yeah, definitely the Culture Foundation. We've already discussed. Let me think. So Philip K. Dick.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like I need to read his most acclaimed novels. So, Ubik is on
I
my.
might read Ubik in May. We'll see. Looking forward to that one.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a nice fancy folio edition
Oh, that's
of that book. So I've got no excuse not to read that one. And that's one of those books which seems to be universally loved. I've never seen anyone say anything negative about it. Then The Man in the High Castle, which is slightly more divisive. Some people don't really like it. I remember that. I don't think Whitney liked it.
Oh,
Isn't that one
which
of the ones
book?
she didn't like? The Man in the High Castle.
Oh no, yeah, she didn't like that. She
Yeah.
hated it. I'm like,
But
there's a
you
lot
know,
of stuff about causality in that book, and she's like, well, there was a bunch of nothing in that book. I'm like, is that?
I
Ugh, you're
I
missing the
really enjoyed.
magic.
Yeah, I liked the Amazon series they did a
I've
few
heard
years
it's a lot
back.
different. I haven't watched it.
Yeah. So, and for me, the concept is so compelling,
Hmm.
right? I mean,
Oh, it gets
yeah,
the book is interesting. It's like, oh, here's the alternate history on top of the It's like Inception a
yeah,
little bit.
yeah,
It's a
and
little bit like Inception.
I mean, I think it's supposed to be the definitive alternate history book.
I do think it's
Yeah.
a
So
solid book. I wouldn't call it one of PKD's best, but I do think it's an interesting one.
okay, well, yeah, that's another one. I've got quite a nice edition of it. It's not a fancy folio, but it's still quite nice. So I want to read that one soon.
Though I
Uh,
would recommend I mean reading well, I would always say either go with his short stories first, or if you want to try one of his novels, do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep is always a good place to start.
yeah,
He's
that.
a writer to be read in stages, is what I've.
So yeah, that was actually my the first
I need to
video.
make like a guide to
Uh,
read Philip K. Dick. I'm gonna do that soon. I'm gonna write that down.
the first book I reviewed for my channel was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
Oh, I'll have
I
to
I
check.
I,
I,
I liked it so much that I thought I'm going to create a YouTube channel just to tell people how much I like it.
it's a good book.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah,
reading it in high school, and
yeah.
this was a while after I saw the movie. I'm like, wow, this is really good. It's really sucking me in, and I wasn't expecting that. So it's a good read.
Um, and the next, I think, big book on my TBR, which I'm going to read very soon, is Inverted World by Christopher Priest.
I've been
Uh,
wanting to read. I've been wanting to read that for years.
yeah, so uh, Christopher Priest. I've only read one book by him. It's one of his more recent books, and he died quite recently,
Yes, I heard that.
and I feel like kind of he's supposed to be one of the best sci-fi writers of his generation, and kind of in honor of him, I feel like I ought to read it. Um, and I'm actually doing that as a buddy read with Bart from Bart's Book Space. Do you know him?
Uh, you mean Bert or
Bart Bart's
oh
Book Space.
oh I don't think I know who
It's
that
another
is.
BookTube channel.
Oh, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. So I recommend his channel. And
Oh
we've
yeah, I know who he
yeah
is. Never mind. Yeah, yeah.
yeah he's very enthusiastic.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so yeah, he's quite infectious in his enthusiasm. So so yeah,
I have him on this show at some
we're
point.
planning to read that in mid-April together, and I've got very. I'm hoping I'm not raising my expectations too high, but I'm really looking forward to that one. So that's supposed to be a bit of a mind-bending novel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard there's a good city in that book. So I don't know.
Yes, and that you asked me earlier what tropes I like. I
You like
one
cities?
of them I like unusual cities or impressive cities, weird cities,
Should read China
futuristic
Me Bill
cities.
then.
I haven't read him yet, but
I said you should
um,
read him if you like weird
oh, I
cities.
should read him. Yeah, I probably should, but
Perdido Street Station's more of a fantasy, but I think you would dig that one. It's definitely has
well,
sci-fi elements in there.
Chasm City by Alistair Reynolds.
I've heard of this. I need to read it. Sounds
It's
like one
actually
I
a
would.
prequel. It's a prequel to the Revelation space series, but you can read it as a standalone. You don't.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a very interesting city and or world which he's constructed in which has been ravaged by this um, disease called the milding plague, which infects both humans and um, like physical matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's created like a very bizarre sort of cyberpunk world of a city which used to be a kind of utopian future state
Mm.
and has now turned into a dystopian nightmare because of this plague.
Because of the
And
city. Lovely.
yeah, so that trying to think of another good example of a weird city or a futuristic city. Yeah, but that is a kind of trope which I like. Uh, Time travel. We haven't talked about time travel.
Oh,
Are you a fan?
I tend to go back and forth on time travel because man, it can so quickly get complicated. But there's stuff like A Sound of Thunder or 12 Monkeys if you want to go to
Yeah,
movies. Primer. I don't know if you ever saw that. That's a very
I have. Yeah.
that's a fantastic movie. Or Time Crimes. I think it'd be done well.
Oh, I love time crimes.
Eleven
I
twenty
think I
two
think it's an
sixty
underrated
three,
movie.
which I don't know if I would call. Well, yeah, I guess it's science fiction because there's time travel, but is
Sorry,
that really?
which film?
Oh, I was talking about a book, 11/22/63 by Stephen
Oh,
King.
Stephen King. Yeah, yeah. No, that's definitely time travel. Yeah,
Fantastic book though. One of my favorite
yeah.
time travel stories. But I
Uh,
go back and forth on time travel. I wouldn't call it one of my. I do like parallel universes though, which
Me too. But time
I'm.
time travel, I think when it's done well, it's really good.
I agree.
I know that there's potential. There's a lot of potential for it to fall flat, um, because almost any time travel story is going to end up in a paradox.
Oh my
Um,
god, yeah. Or Terminator.
but
I love Terminator 1 and 2.
yeah,
Classics.
yeah.
I actually like the
Um,
first one more, which is another kind of spicy take. But I don't know. I like that grunginess of that first movie a lot.
but I think a book I could recommend to you if you haven't already read it is the first 15 Lives of Harry August.
Oh, I have not heard of the, or I've not. Well, no.
Uh,
I think I heard my
it's
friend D talk about this. Who's it by?
Claire North.
Oh, then maybe I'm thinking of something else. But no, I've
So
not heard of this.
it's it's time travel with a twist. It's a kind of time loop, which is a kind of another trope or sub trope, if you like, of time travel, which I quite enjoy. Um, and it's about a man who keeps on being reborn. He lives out his life, he dies, and he's reborn again as a baby to the same circumstances, but with all his memories from his previous lives intact.
Oh, that reminds me of a. Have you ever heard of Ken Greenwood? It reminds me of one of his books. I forget what it's called.
Are
But
you thinking of Replay?
yeah,
Yeah, I've read that as well. They are very similar. The but I think Claire North does it better.
I mean
Yeah,
I haven't read Replay, but I know that's a very well known book. Which I
yeah,
guess that's technically time travel. I don't know.
it is. It's a different type of time travel. Um, but in Replay, I would say it's less of a sci-fi book because this is introduced as a literary device, right?
Mm.
A man who lives out his life and then he dies of a heart attack in his early 40s and he gets reborn at the age of 18 and he lives it again. Um, but it's never actually explained really how or why this happens. So, but whereas in the first 15 lives of Harry August, there is kind of more of a timey-wimey sci-fi explanation, and it's not the only sci-fi concept in the book. So there's a lot more going on. I think the plot is a lot more layered, whereas in Replay, it's a bit. I wouldn't say it's predictable, but the protagonist just kind of does the things we'd expect him to do. Is like he he knows what's going to happen in the future, right? So he can make easy money. He knows all of the sports teams are going to win which games, so he can, he just gambles all his money knowing that he's going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's got a romantic element to it where he meets a woman who in the same kind of circumstances as he is. It's a good story, but first 15 Lives of Harry August is much more interesting. I think it there's deeper kind of it's more of a deeper character study. There's
Mm.
more compelling historical fiction
Mm.
because the protagonist he grows up like early 20th century, so he lives through World War II, and um, I think he has a rougher time of it because when he gets reborn, he's a baby. So he has to live through his whole childhood again, knowing everything he does as an adult and all of his previous lives, but he still has to grow up as a young child. Whereas the guy in Replay, he's got it perfect really because he gets reborn into his young adult self as a college student. I mean, who wouldn't want to go back to that time? If you have to go back to any time in your life, uh, when you're middle aged or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that would be the perfect time to go back to.
Mm.
I don't think many people want to relive their childhood again and again and again.
Yeah, that would be
Uh,
that would be something. I mean, oh my god,
uh,
there's so many I want to try. I mean, I want to try more M. John Harrison. I want to try more J.G. Ballard. I want to try Brian Aldiss and Thomas Dish and uh, you
J.G.
know,
Ballard, yeah.
and Samuel Delaney. I haven't tried Samuel Delaney yet. I know it's disgraceful.
Don't worry, most of those authors I haven't really tried. Uh, I have read Ballard, and
Oh, I love High
and
Rise. High Rise is a fantastic book. Also,
I've not read
Crash is
that
really
one.
good too.
I've got kind of mixed opinions on him, but to be fair, I don't think I've read enough of him yet to say
Yeah, he's
whether I
really
like him or not.
weird. He's really postmodern. He's kind of like Vonnegut in that way.
Yeah, I think the things that I have read
Sci-fi
by
is a
him.
lens for
Uh,
postmodern, as I like to say about their
well,
work.
I've read some of his short stories, and some of them were so surreal that I just it wasn't really my cup of tea. I couldn't really understand what was going on. But I have read a few. I've read kind of some things by him which I was really impressed by. So he wrote one short story called Chronopolis, which was amazing. Uh,
Jeff Noon is another one. I actually
yeah,
have a Man of Shadows, which is the first of his. I think it's John Nyquist. They're like noir, weird sci-fi work, and I'm like, I like noir and science fiction, so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm down.
oh well, yeah. Some of Alistair Reynolds' stuff is like that.
I've heard that. Yeah,
So yeah,
that's what made me interested. Also, oh, what's another one? Uh, so many. Like Day of the Triflids. I want to read that.
John Wyndham. Yeah, no, that is another classic author I'm a fan of.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's got kind of sort of cozy feel to it, like small town England of the 1950s feel to it.
I bet that.
Um, but at the same time, quite horrific.
I bet
Yeah,
that spooked you out. I don't know where you
yeah,
live, but
um,
but
yeah. David the Triffids is a great one. Yeah.
there's so many. Like, and there's always more. Like, there's one that I saw Whitney talk about called Mickey 7, which sounded pretty cool.
Yes, I've heard mixed reviews on it, but there's a movie coming out, so I would give it a shot.
Oh, is there?
Um,
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't know about
I
that.
I, I believe so. Yeah,
Ursula K. Le Guin is pretty high up there. Like, that's like my one. I'm like, I'm gonna try it. I don't know when. I'm gonna do it.
yeah. She's one of those. I would like to read at least all of her Hainish cycle books.
I
That's
also.
what she's.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What were you saying? You're
No,
gonna
I was
read
just
her
saying
Hainish
that's what
cycle?
she's most well known for. Her Hainish cycle, which includes the Left Hand of Darkness and a few others.
I've Yeah, it's either that or Earthsea.
Uh, have you read Rendezvous with Rama?
I have not. Yeah, and then speaking of that, yeah, I need to read like The City and the Stars from Arthur C. Clarke and Rendezvous with Rama. So many, so many.
And 2001.
And 2001, because
Yeah.
I've only seen the film, but I really loved the
Yeah.
film though. I really loved the movie.
Did you ever watch the sequel? Whatever it's called.
A
It was
long time
2010.
ago.
I've not watched it, but I read the Wikipedia synopsis the other day and think, oh, maybe I should give that a try because the reviews were surprisingly positive.
Yeah, I'm kind
Uh,
of, that's one of my things. I don't mean to interrupt you again, but like,
no, it's fine.
one of my like weird, like, I'm kind of surprised why people like Dune so much. I don't know what it is. I would
Um,
think that it would alienate more modern readers than not. But I don't know. People are different.
well, I think it's got a certain aesthetic to it, a certain epic appeal to it, which I think draws in quite a lot of the fantasy crowd.
Mm,
There's a lot of fantasy readers who love Dune.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I would say
yeah,
Dune is science fantasy. I think you could get
yeah,
away with calling it that.
I think so, and it's got a lot of the tropes of fantasy, but I would say it's definitely it definitely is sci-fi, but that's why it was quite groundbreaking for when it was released because there wasn't a lot like that at the time in science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's also kind
Yeah.
of deconstructing the. Well, it's called planetary romance now, but it's kind of like Barsoom. I don't know if you ever read that.
No.
Oh, yeah, it's I mean, yeah, I don't know what you would think if you read it. I mean, they're pretty quick reads. Edgar Rice Burroughs. Um,
Uh, yeah. No, I've not read a lot of that sort of what do you call it? The pulpy stuff from that sort of era.
though it is
Uh,
interesting seeing science fiction from like back in the 30s because I actually read a story called The Machine Stops a little while ago because
I've heard of that one.
a friend of
Yeah.
mine recommended it to me who is not a reader of any type of speculative fiction. So I thought it was interesting to see what he saw in it. Um, it was an interesting read and also interesting, just because he lived in like the 30s. So it's always interesting before like reading the sci-fi before like Heinlein and Clarke and Asimov showed up.
Yeah. Um, I do need to read more from that period because I didn't even have a lot of books on my bookshelf from that time. It's mostly from like the golden age onwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, but that man, so many, so many. My God, like there's still some Philip K. Dick books I need to read because that man wrote a lot. I've heard not all of them are good,
Yeah.
but I'm
And
gonna
not
read,
all of them are science fiction.
and not all of them are science
Yeah,
fiction
yeah,
either.
yeah,
Because like towards the end of his life, he got into some really wacky like religious revelations. So,
yeah.
oh man.
Um,
Well, I guess the last question here, which I guess we've kind of talked about a little bit, but what is a science fiction book or books? It can be plural. Should people should read before they die?
it's difficult to say because I'm not really someone who likes to say to people, you have to read this book or everyone should read this. But
Like,
I think there
I
are
guess
some,
like what's a
yeah,
book that you feel really passionate about? You're
okay.
like, man, about
Uh,
finish today. I don't know.
right. So I think that there's kind of like my personal opinion, and then there's like cornerstones within the genre. Sometimes these overlap. So I take for example 1984, which is so big that I
Mm-hmm.
think it transcends genre. because I think most people who've read it probably don't even consider it to be science fiction, or then they're not like sci-fi readers. But I think it's
I think it
such.
is.
I think it definitely is. Um, and I think not just because it contains speculative technology, but
Mm,
because I think because it posits a futuristic dystopian society, that in itself is a form of social science fiction. So I'm of the belief that science fiction doesn't have to involve new technology necessarily,
mm-hmm.
because there's such a thing as social sciences, not just hard sciences. So things like anthropology and sociology and things like that. So if we posit a futuristic dystopian society, that is a form of science fiction, in my opinion. Some people would disagree with that, but anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I'm digressing. The point is, I think everyone should read it because it's so monumental. It's so much a part of our culture. I mean, it's had such an influence on our culture, and it's obviously a warning of where we don't want to go. And a lot of people think that
That's a good way to put it.
well, a lot of people interpret it as saying, oh, it was Orwell was basically saying this is communism or whatever. This is the danger of communism, but it's not really just that. It could be any kind of totalitarian society.
Mm-hmm.
There are elements of 1984, Big Brother. Um, what's that term? Like
We're 101.
what? Yeah, I'm trying to remember what all the terms are now.
No
Like
speak.
mind. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, all of
Double
those
think.
concepts, right? Double think. Yeah, exactly. Double think. Room 101, and the
So many more.
surveillance state. Yeah, these are things that any society, any modern technical society, is at risk of. It's a path that any society is at risk of going down. Right? Doesn't matter if we are a liberal democracy or a totalitarian communist state. We These are all dangers which we are, not far from becoming if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
And some societies have already gone in that direction. So it's a warning, but it's just a good story, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a I think quite a profound story, and it works well on so many levels. So, and I think it's a book that everyone should read. Is it the best science fiction story? Probably not, but I think
I think it's one of them,
it's
but you know.
one of them. I did put it in my top 10. I mean, I also put Philip Jose Farmer's Riverworld series in my top 10,
Mm.
but that is a totally different type of book, and that's kind of
I've been asking to try him. He seems like in that kind of
yeah,
pulpy, kind of goofy sort of way.
yeah.
I could be
So
wrong though.
it is quite pulpy. It is quite ridiculous. Um, but I loved it so much. But is it something everyone should read? Probably not. Uh, Frankenstein, we've mentioned. I think that's kind of got a similar status to 1984 in terms of its like cornerstone classic status.
Mm-hmm.
I think okay, I'll just give you one more in terms of contemporary modern science fiction. I think perhaps Children of Time by Agent Tchaikovsky.
I still need to read that.
But
I've heard it's good.
I only read it quite recently, but I think it felt very fresh. It felt like it's doing something quite new with the genre, although maybe I'm wrong because I haven't read it. Maybe it's all been done before. I just didn't realize it, but it felt very fresh to me. It brought something new to the genre, and I think I would probably rank that as my top my favorite science fiction novel of the 21st century that I've read so far. And granted, there are a lot out there that I haven't read yet, but so there you go. I've picked one from each century. We've got Frankenstein for the 19th century, 1984 for the 20th century, and Children of Time for the 21st century.
I mean that's pretty good. I mean those are some good choices. Though I haven't read Children of Time, so I don't have opinions on that yet. Someday. Also, Tchaikovsky just writes a crap load. No.
Yeah, he's very prolific. I've not read anything else. I mean, I've read the 3 books in the Children of Time series. I don't think the sequels are quite as good. They're still worth reading, but I definitely want to read more of his work.
Yeah, I think that I mean, yeah, it's like it's always the one I hear. Tchaikovsky, I think that's how you pronounce it, and Alistair
Uh,
Reynolds.
yeah, Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky.
Yeah, and yeah, he also came to visit us in our sci-fi group
Oh,
last year.
really?
So, yeah.
Oh, wow. Who else has showed up to your sci-fi group?
In the time that I've joined, those are probably the 2 most famous. Uh, so there are some relatively unknown authors, but we're hoping, and I don't quote me on this because it may not happen, but we're hoping that maybe Peter F. Hamilton will
Ah,
come
that's another one I
come
need to
and visit.
read.
I've not read him yet, but he's so actually I find I'm a bit intimidated by him because his books are so long. It's
Hmm.
like each novel is about 1,200 pages long. So when you asked me earlier about my concerns over where science fiction is going, for me, that's the kind of thing that puts me off. Is like contemporary authors
Really
that
long,
don't
really long books.
that don't they don't. I can't really criticize them if I haven't read his work, but but they don't perhaps edit their books enough.
Yeah.
Uh, Same could be said of George R. Martin, perhaps in fantasy, but I know fantasy readers love that kind of thing, don't they? So who am I to say?
Yeah. Well, I mean
Yeah.
that is all the questions I have for the state of science fiction. Thanks for joining me, Robin. I appreciate this a lot. This was fun.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
If you want to share any social media or anything like that you have, feel free.
I don't really use Twitter or anything like that.
You have Goodreads at
I mean,
least.
oh yeah, I am on Goodreads. I don't use it a whole lot. I track the books that I read on Goodreads, and obviously there's my YouTube account. So
You are on Discord though,
yeah,
so
yes, I'm on Discord. Yeah,
that's always nice.
yeah.
But again, thank you, Robin, for coming on and giving some of your time to talk about a genre we both love. So there we go.
Oh, thank you.
Hopefully we can
And
talk again.
yeah, I will carry on following your channel, and yeah, give us some more of your reviews because I liked hearing your take on Dune, and I want to know your thoughts on other stuff too. So,
Yeah, I hope to do more of them. Well, until next time on the state of science fiction, we'll see you in May.
all right, see you later.
All right.